Don't try and be the next big thing. Don't try and save the world tomorrow. Don't try and do a short-term missions trip and get a whole country saved because you're the big important anointed person. No, let's make ourselves small and let's be really obedient to Jesus and his teachings. Let's love our neighbor. I mean, this is Jesus who said all the law and the prophets are summarized in this: love God and love your neighbor.
Welcome to the Ramp Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This podcast is about equipping and encouraging you in your everyday life following Jesus.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Ramp Podcast. My name's Rayner, and I am excited to be able to share with you guys today. Hope you're all doing well. Today, I'm going to talk about how to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Actually, the topic that they sort of asked me to speak about was how to reach the world and how to reach your backyard. That's a big topic. That's like talking about every human being in the world. So I thought today I wanted to share with you just one simple thought regarding how to reach people. You know, I think I find one of the things when I talk to people about outreach or evangelism, one of the things that seems to hold people back the most is just making connection with people. Just actually kind of like getting that foot in the door where you have some sort of connection, you're able to comfortably share your faith to talk about Jesus. And so I want to look at the person of Jesus Christ today and share some thoughts and some insights. Some of the things actually I teach here at the Ramp School of Missions, which my wife and I, Julie and I, were the directors of the Ramp School of Missions here at the Ramp University. And so what I want to do is I want to look at the person of Jesus, and in particular, I want to talk about the incarnation, and that is the way in which Jesus came. It's interesting to me that Jesus did not come to earth for 4 days to preach the Sermon on the Mount. He wasn't a conference speaker. He didn't come down here to teach us. He didn't come down to tell us all our problems. He didn't come down just to fix us. He didn't come down just to die on the cross for us. Jesus came to earth to be with us. His name is, as Isaiah 7 says, Emmanuel, God is with us. That's not talking about like, oh, if you're having a hard time, the Holy Spirit will comfort you. It's talking about Jesus came and became one of us. He became human. John chapter 1 says that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. That's really interesting to think about. Jesus came to earth to dwell with us. He came to be one of us. And he didn't come for 1 week as an adult. He came as a baby and became fully human. That's really interesting. And in the study of missions, we look a lot at the manner in which Jesus came. We actually talk a lot in missions about how Jesus actually is a missionary. He's the ultimate missionary. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. We have a God who has a nature that is missional. We even talk about how missions, it actually starts in the character of God. It's not an event. It's not a department of the church. It's not a school at your university. Missions is actually who God is. He sends himself, and he sent himself in the form of his Son. What I love about that is that Jesus actually is the exact representation of the Father. Jesus says on earth, he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Jesus, in the New Testament, Paul says that Jesus is the exact representation of the being of the Father, that Jesus Christ, who is the image of God, says in Colossians that Jesus, the Son, is the image of the invisible God. So when we look at Jesus, we actually get this full and complete picture of who God is. And so when you see Jesus in a manger, you actually see what God's like. We kind of always think, well, that's just the little bit in the Bible that helps us celebrate Christmas. No, Jesus in the manger is helping us understand what God is like. That God's humble, that God's meek, that though the whole government of the whole universe rests on his shoulders, as I read that in Isaiah this morning, that government rests on this little infant. There's all this authority, yet he's made himself really small and really meek. That's what God's like. And so actually when you see Jesus in the manger, that's actually an example to us of how to do missions. It's an example of us of how to reach people with the gospel. It's an example of ministry. We like to often say in the church, Jesus was on the earth for all this time, but he only did ministry for his last 3 years. I don't know that I would say it that way. I think Jesus started his ministry when he became a little baby in a manger. That's how he came. That's how he was sent. He came to dwell. And so what do we learn from this when we look at Jesus in the manger? We learn that to reach people with the gospel, we don't just rock up and preach at them, although the preaching's important and conferences are important and equipping and training the saints, all of that's important. But if you want to be able to reach people who are not reached with the gospel, they're not already coming to church, they don't have a connection to a church, we need to go and dwell with them. We need to go and have meals with them, become friends, do life with them the way that Jesus came and became one of us. We need to follow his example. I like to look over a couple of chapters into chapter Luke where you see Jesus at the temple. I often ask my class, I put up a picture of the little boy Jesus in the temple and everyone's gathered around him. And I say, what is this? And everyone always says, well, that's boy Jesus teaching in the temple. And I say, well, actually, I don't think that's what's happening here. Because that's actually not what the Bible says. If you read the Bible, it says, where is it? Luke 2 verse 46. It doesn't actually say that Jesus was teaching. It says, after 3 days they found him in the temple courts. He was sitting amongst the teachers. So he wasn't the teacher. There's others were the teachers. He was sitting amongst the teachers. He was listening to them, and he was asking them questions. It doesn't say he was teaching. He was sitting, he was listening, and he was asking questions. That's what Jesus was doing. Isn't it so crazy that God, this is Jesus Christ through whom all things were created, through him and for him. He has all authority. The whole government is on his shoulders. That's who Jesus is. He's the exact, full, complete representation of the fullness of the deity of God. And here he is sitting in the temple, listening and asking questions of people whom, 20 years down the track, he is going to say, you whitewashed tombs. It's fascinating. And I remind you, this is Jesus. He's the image of God. This is what God's like. This is an example. This is Jesus. This isn't Jesus waiting around until his ministry starts. This is Jesus doing ministry. This is an example to us. This is what I like to call the incarnational model of Jesus Christ, the incarnational model for ministry of Jesus Christ. He's teaching us how to do missions. He's teaching us how to engage with people. And this is what happens. He's sitting, he's listening, and he's asking questions. Next verse, everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. It's kind of interesting because he's not the one teaching. He's the one asking questions. And I think that tells us something. It tells us that when you sit and when you listen and when you ask questions, you gain a door relationally where people will ask you questions. And when people ask you questions, then you can respond with the gospel and their ears are open to hear it. We do a lot of local outreach here in our lovely little town of Hamilton, and we, there's a lot of people that are not that connected in our community to other people. There's a lot of people that aren't necessarily connected to a church, really to anyone. There's a lot of elderly, and so we just kind of go out a couple of times a week with my students and my interns, and we'll connect with people, and we kind of just try to put into practice this idea of dwelling. Sometimes that looks like playing basketball. Sometimes that looks like cooking a barbecue. Sometimes that looks like just checking on people and seeing if everyone's okay, see if someone needs help that day, and usually we find there's always someone in need, and so it's just a great opportunity to be Jesus to people, and so we've been doing this for a few years since I've been here, and I think tomorrow, this year we wanted to start actually doing some Bible studies with some of the people that we've become friends with. I think tomorrow we're going to start our 4th Bible study out in the community with people that typically wouldn't necessarily come to a church, and it's great to just be able to sit down and chat with people. And if you were to ask me, well, how do you do that? How do you start like a Bible study with people who don't want to go to church or whatever? My answer would be, we sit, we listen, and we ask questions. And when you do that, and sometimes we do that for years, and this is something that you can do in your local town. This is something you can do if you're a missionary on the other side of the world working in Africa or Asia or amongst, wherever you're working, this is pretty simple to follow. It doesn't matter what culture you're a part of, what language. You can sit, you can listen, and you can ask questions. And there's this principle here that when you do that, you gain relationally people's ear, and people want to hear what you have to say. And there's something important about asking questions in particular. Like, I kind of feel, I don't know what's going on in the world. I feel like no one's asking questions anymore. I feel like everyone's just talking and yelling and saying stuff, and it kind of drives me crazy. I feel like no one listens anymore. And if no one's listening, there's a lot of people out there that aren't going to feel like anyone cares about them or wants to hear them. And there's something so powerful when you do this model that Jesus has given us of he came small. He didn't come big like a big king or with an army like everyone expected them to. He didn't come as a ruling power. He didn't come from an important fancy family. He came from a really small family that was fairly poor. It didn't have any big standing amongst the community. He was a part of a people group who were oppressed by the Roman Empire. He had no clout about him. He made himself really small. And not only that, he wasn't born in some fancy hospital with a great insurance plan. He was born in a stable or a manger. That's a food trough. He started off in a food trough where animals eat food. That's the manner in which he came. He made himself really small. And when we make ourselves kind of small, we actually get to follow his example. And that gives us this key of building relationship. When you're wanting to connect with someone that isn't interested in church, that isn't interested in Jesus, if you try and make yourself big and try and preach at them, you might not have their ears. You might say things that are really true, but they might be like, I'm not listening, because you haven't got their ears. But when you make yourself small like Jesus, humble, meek, and you listen and you ask questions, here's what happens. When you ask questions, you're communicating, I value you. It's like you're making yourself small and you're making them big and important. You're not being the big important person. I'm in charge here. I've got the gospel. This is so important with cross-cultural missions. So important. You're not being the big important Westerner that, helped colonize the world and we know everything. We have all the information and power. No, when you ask questions, you make yourself small and you say, actually, what you have to say is important. And I'm going to sit here and I'm going to listen to the important things about your life, to the important things that you think. I mean, like I say, back to starting small groups in our local town. Sometimes we've listened to people for a couple of years, and after 2 years of sitting and listening and asking questions, there's questions coming back and people are wanting to learn and people are wanting to grow and have understanding about the Lord. So it's like, hey, let's do a Bible study. We'll come next week with our Bibles. And hey, presto, we have a Bible study. Not that that's the end goal. The end goal is that we get to do what Jesus did and we get to get the gospel in people. And so it's just, to me, such an important question, even for those of you that maybe find outreach or evangelism, if that's just evokes that, I can't do it, I'm not one of those, incredibly social people, or connecting's difficult for me. Just ask questions. You can just keep asking people questions for so long, because when you're asking people questions, they feel valued. And that's so much of actually what the gospel is it brings value. Like the anointing of Jesus, he valued people. He valued the poor. He valued this woman at this well who the whole city probably despised. She was full of sin and married to all these different men, and she's off going to the well at the middle of the day because probably none of the other women wanted anything to do with her. And he just sits and waits for her. I mean, how many times in the Bible do you see, he might have been sitting for hours, who knows, but Jesus sits and waits because he values that woman. And when you value people, goodness me, it opens the door for the gospel. It opens the door for them feeling the love of Jesus, feeling the heart of God for them, that he values them. So Luke 2:46, verse 46, Jesus sat in the temple and asked questions. It's such a key of how to engage with people. And we do live in a world that is making so much noise, and there's this, social media, right? There's this pressure on every human being to make something of yourself and to be big or to be important, or it's kind of like we're all in competition with an entire world full of people's best fake version of themselves that they present online, right? So there's this tendency in the world today in general, and it's creeping into the church, for us to make ourselves big, even in ministry, like get your name out there, get your material out there, write a few books, that all of that's important. We want to train and equip, but there is this pressure that comes on us to make ourselves big, and sometimes that means we end up kind of fighting against the model that Jesus gave us, where he didn't come down to make himself big. He actually came down and made himself really small and really meek. I think it's so important to learn from that example that we want to make ourselves small, and we want to sit and we want to listen to people. So if you're wanting to be challenged in outreach, or if you're sort of confused about how do I do this, or how do I reach my neighbors, here's my advice to you is, don't try and be the next big thing. Don't try and save the world tomorrow. Don't try and do a short-term missions trip and get a whole country saved because you're the big important anointed person. No, let's make ourselves small, and let's be really obedient to Jesus and his teachings. Let's love our neighbor. This is Jesus who said all the law and the prophets are summarized in this: love God and love your neighbor. That's his example to us. That's his teaching to us. And so we can make ourselves really obedient to those really simple, small truths. And I would encourage you, find people in your community that are lonely, find people that are in need, find people that don't have community. Make yourself small, sit, listen, ask questions, and you'll gain their ear, and you'll be able to put the gospel in their hearts. And I believe that's just a really cool, practical, but also spiritually important way of sharing the gospel. So I'd encourage you to chew on that and think about that, and hope that blesses you. And hey, if you find people in your community hearing the gospel because you're asking questions and getting to know them, then let us know. Send us an email or comment on the YouTube page. We'd love to hear how the Lord's using you. Bless you guys. We'll see you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this message from The Ramp. For more content like this, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For more information on our upcoming events and services, visit theramp.org. We look forward to seeing you soon.